Welcome to Straight from the Source with Hayley Watts, and today our guest is Jamie Johansson, who is a local farmer and also running for state assembly. Well, big ambition.
Yeah. There's big plans ahead, so been busy, but enjoy kind of back to farming after all that I've been doing, down in Sacramento and everything. But it's a pleasure to be here, so thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here today. So farming, agriculture, it's such a huge part of our lives, even for those of us who can't grow a darn thing and have like a black thumb, like sometimes I feel like is the case for me. But it's such a huge industry in our area, right? You're an olive farmer.
Yeah,
right?
I farm olives, some citrus, but primarily olive oil is where I started. I've always wanted to do cows, beef cattle, and stuff like that, but knew I'd never get big enough. So you got to go where the money's at in farming. And in the early '90s, that was olive oil was just starting up. So I became a back end supplier and kind of learned how to farm olives. I'm a first generation farmer, so I didn't start. I didn't have a farming background, but just an appreciation for agriculture. And certainly, you're right. Agriculture is huge in California. In fact, I like to say that agriculture makes California essential for America. I mean, that's how big California is. We're like the 6th or 7th largest ag economy in the world.
Yeah.
Doing nearly $60 billion a year in agriculture in California. And Butte County is a strong part of that when you look at the crops we do grow. We're not one of the largest. We're kind of in the middle of the counties, doing about $600 million a year in agricultural farm gate value. But certainly, the thing that I appreciate about this area is that we're diverse. So, whether it's prunes, peaches, walnuts, rice, almonds, olives, and even citrus, and the history of it is amazing too. And that's what really drew me to starting a farm trail back in 2004 to really highlight the importance of agriculture in the county, because a lot of people didn't know it was in their own backyard. And certainly, now after when they celebrate their 30th anniversary of the Chico Farmers Market on Saturday, which I did for about a decade. Other than that, they don't know what's here. And Butte County, and particularly when you go back to Mr. Bidwell, was really at the center of, and I'd say arguably the father of modern California agriculture because of his innovations, bringing in fruit trees, realizing that we weren't just going to do the traditional grains and make it. So it became creative. And here we are in Butte County and really the North State. When you look at Yuba and Sutter, very similar, maybe not in size, but the diversity that we have. And it creates opportunities for people like myself to get in there and start from the ground floor up.
So, I've met so many farmers since I moved to this area, and I've never met, I don't think, a first generation farmer before. It always seems like it's one of those traditions, like how do you get into it if you don't already own acres and acres of land through your family? And you just decided, you saw that this was the industry that really makes our region, right? Like, how did you pick olives? Do you love olives, black or green? What's your favorite?
Yeah, no, and family's always involved, even in the first generation. You just need that, especially when you're a young person starting out. And so, my parents I grew up in Humboldt County, and I grew up, my dad was a doctor, so I didn't have a farming background. In small towns, you kind of pigeonholed as to what you're gonna do, but certainly in Humboldt, surrounded by agriculture and the dairy industry, and all my friends were either dairymen or in timber. And so getting here, they had bought a place that just had 20 acres of olives on it. And I thought, well, maybe we could do something with that. Quickly realized that there is a scale of economy. I knew we had to be more creative than just selling to a cannery. So we looked for that value added. And like I said, people were looking at creating world-class olive oil in California. So I kind of tagged along with them, and we all kind of learned as we went along what to do and what not to do. But very fortunate, and a lot of life is timing. And eventually bought a neighbor's place, and you can get creative with. It was an older lady who wanted to sell to someone who would keep it in agriculture. So she got to live on the property while I was buying it and paying it off. Kind of a reduced rate, so you have to be creative to get that piece of land to start the ball rolling.
Okay, do you love olive oil yourself? I'm Italian. I cook with everything without olive oil. I make a cake with olive oil sometimes. I love the taste of it.
It's funny I would like to say at the time probably I was the only Swedish descendant doing olive oil, because in Sweden the family background was not olive oil. It was still pretty heavy in the butter, which I equally enjoy. But certainly, once you taste it, it changes. That was the best, really, when you're at a farmer's market the number one question when I was starting out in the 90s was olive oil, what do I do with it? And I was thinking, well, this is going to be a long career if I have to explain to everybody, because the Mediterranean diet hadn't come in yet. So that's when it really exploded, and you didn't have, the cooking shows and people using olive oil. And there was one chef who used to call it EVOO. So it was measurable because people would see you there and they go, oh, EVOO. So you knew that the media was catching in. So it was a fun time, but a difficult time.
Yeah.
You may have been the only one in the market, but if you don't have a big marketing budget, it's all word of mouth, and you're traveling a lot. So we did a lot of farmers markets and food shows and build the brand.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's even like a health food now. Like you hear about the
Certainly.
polyphenols. I know people who will take shots of it like it's a vitamin.
Yeah. And it's kind of how agriculture has changed too. Is the average size of an orchard in olive orchard in California in the 80s and 90s was really only 20 acres. And that has rapidly changed in terms of those who's in the business because of mechanization and how the industry's grown.
Right.
I remember 98, 99, the first high density olive orchard. So like my orchard, our trees are 100 years old, 50 trees to the acre, and now they do high density where they're up to 150, 190 trees to the acre, all mechanically harvested. But to make that work for you, you have to farm considerably more than 20 acres. So all of agriculture is kind of evolving into it's having to get bigger, which isn't necessarily a good thing, and it can be good for the consumer in terms of bringing price down. But it's a change that all of agriculture is really facing right now in California.
How is the water use for olives versus almonds or rice or other things?
It's similar in terms if you're going to irrigate your olives. The only thing that's with olives is that you can dry farm olives. The trees won't die.
Oh.
In fact, there's two things really that can kill an olive tree, it seems like, is either fire or too much water.
Okay.
But it's about 3 acre feet a year is what you're going to get if you're when we were selling to the cannery to get the proper size so that you got the right price for them. You water your olives, so like irrigating olives for olive oil, you get about 50 gallons to the ton, 40 to 50 gallons to the ton. If you don't water them, you'll get a quarter of the crop, 20% of what you normally would get, and only about maybe 20 gallons to the ton. So, it's kind of a decision, and a totally different style oil. But water use for all of California really is fairly similar in terms of, tree production. There isn't one that, unlike what they try to say, there isn't one that's just, uses way too much water compared to other crops.
So what do you think about, have you had to implement things like drip irrigation and that sort of stuff like in your own property and in your time at the Farm Bureau? Did you kind of work on like how do we use water more sustainably?
Yeah, I mean, in California, where drought is a regular occurrence, people think it's a rare occurrence, but it
just comes in cycles,
drought,
right?
Right,
Yeah.
And I think 40 out of the last 100 years in California has been in a drought situation.
Yeah.
And actually, we farm in California because we want it dry during the spring and summer months and early fall. But yeah, so water innovation has been at the forefront of agriculture as it gets harder and harder to compete to get more water in these drought situations. So certainly involved in water management and how we use less water and have been successful at doing that. And it will continue to be going forward to continue to be a struggle for California farmers in terms of what we're facing if we get continued droughts like we're going to get.
Yeah. Interesting. Did you ever read East of Eden?
I never read that.
Okay, so that's a good one, and I remember reading that when maybe when I was a kid, and they had these like water witchers, right?
Yeah.
Have you heard of those? Are those still used?
No, not in a traditional.
You don't have faith that somebody can have like sticks and find where the water is?
I haven't.
They drill a well.
I think we'll rely on more science, but I know that there are people that have used it and claim to have been successful. But I have never personally worked with one.
There's a lot of old mythology, but I think I bring that up to say the fact that the need for water and like, hey, where do we get we know the water's down there, right? But exactly where and how much and in what spaces. And I mean, I've heard of areas where the ground is sinking because you were talking about these large-scale operations with more mechanization and these big companies coming in and farming and the wells going so deep.
Yeah.
But
subsidence is what you're referring to. And really, the solution to subsidence is more surface water, and that's really what we've been pushing for in my years with California Farm Bureau. And getting involved in Sacramento politics is really more surface water. So the solution for groundwater depletion is infrastructure, and the infrastructure to get more surface water so that people don't have to rely on groundwater. For a lot of times, if you look at, particularly in the Central Valley, it's been a big issue, and certainly in Butte County on the west side there, along the Sacramento River, a lot of issues going forward. The problem has been the unreliability of the surface water based on environmental rules, or improperly applied science, or maybe outdated science that just says more water going down to the ocean is best for the environment. When we know now, certainly you can see what's happening in our rice fields, what they're experimenting with time flows, and recreating some of those wetlands that traditionally had been here to kind of preserve some of those flows and help the fish habitat.
Yeah.
But for a long time, we've been fighting is just getting the water south where it's needed, and those people's exercising there. Most people don't know that Lake Oroville, a lot of that water ends up in Kern County. I believe 40% of the water in Lake Oroville ended up in Kern County. And so when they don't have that, they turn to the next available option, which is their groundwater.
Right.
So if we're going to get a handle on, actually develop sustainable groundwater management, we're going to have to address our surface water flows.
So would you say that you support the state's move to basically require these groundwater sustainability agencies? I mean, I know that a lot of opponents say that a lot of the money that people are paying in right now just go to setting the bureaucracy of it, right? Not even paying for the projects themselves.
Right. And there has to be accountability in what those costs are. And what are they really going to? If it's simply if those costs are going to just finance more and more, bureaucracy, then we need to relook at it. Is there a solution, a workable solution? And like I said, for most places, it is simply getting timely deliveries of surface water on a predictable scale.
Okay.
That simply isn't there, and so it'll continue to be a challenge. SGMA, unfortunately, people have. If you saw the development in 2015 when SGMA was signed into law by Governor Brown, certainly we opposed it at that time. One of the reasons we had in 2014 Prop 1, which overwhelmingly passed in California, and that was for more surface water. So what you're seeing is the implementation of SGMA, but we haven't seen the surface water implementation of Prop 1, which was passed by the voters. So there's going to be problems until we address the surface water situation in California.
So, okay, for people who don't have a ton of education about exactly how water management works, including myself, when we talk about surface water, we're talking about what falls from the sky and collects essentially on the surface, and how do we...
Runs through our rivers and irrigation canals, and stored in reservoirs or,
So we want to use more surface water, but we need to create infrastructure, you're saying, essentially, to collect it and distribute it.
Correct, yes, and maintain that infrastructure that we have.
And whose job is it? Who pays for the infrastructure?
Believe it or not, the state water project, the state water contractors, the end users pay for the state water, system. There's a little bit of state responsibility and fees just based on recreation that it provides and also environmental benefits that it provides, but it's the end user who pays for those uses, and that's why this is a critical month, and maybe a lot of your list, Sites Reservoir is one reservoir that's been mentioned in correlation with the passing of Prop 1. Believe it or not, Sites Reservoir, I have a map from the 1960s, and there's a proposed Sites Reservoir from the early 1960s that just never got built, which is not uncommon in California when it comes to timeliness and getting through all the red tape.
Yeah.
But this is kind of a pivotal month, because when you build a reservoir like that, or a pivotal year for that, because now they're determining if they build this reservoir, they have to make sure that the water going into it isn't someone else's, water by right. So the state water board will determine that, and then they'll have to determine what the costs are, and they will go back out to water districts and end users and say, this is what the water is going to cost. Are you in? In terms of per acre foot, what the cost is going to be, and so it's all supposed to happen this summer. So we'll see if they follow through on the promise when it comes to more surface water, which supposedly they say California says they're for in terms of Sacramento.
We'll see what happens. It'd be amazing. I'd hope to see sites happen during my lifetime.
Certainly.
I was just rafting on the American River with my family, and I'd heard this before, but someone had mentioned how the Forest Hill Bridge was initially, that was going to be a dam.
Right.
And that they were going to create a huge reservoir there. I think that was also would have been State Water Project, not Bureau of Reclamation.
Right.
But
I'm not familiar with that one, but even down below on the Feather River, there's a lot of proposed sites that in the original State Water Project that were never followed through on that would have given us more water. And certainly, you know, it's interesting if you go back and look at the development of the state water system. It was a $1 billion proposition passed by the people of California. It had actually been put on the ballot by a legislature that, I believe it was the first time, majority was Democrat, and every office holder save one state office holder was a Democrat, and it passed by a vote in the 1960s by the voters, and then by 1968 you had Ronald Reagan up in Oroville dedicating the Oroville Dam, and they predicted it would take many years for that dam to fill up, but it did it like in half the time. So we know the water's there.
Right.
You know, and that's the thing with California. And when we talk about water storage, we also have to talk about flood control, because it's a dual purpose a system in terms of providing water, but also important for flood control.
Yeah, I read some book about, it's called The Dreamt Land, actually, and it was just about water use and the history of our state, and they were talking about, you know, before Lake Orville was there or anything, how like Marysville just like flooded, like deadly floodings when they first built it, because they had no idea what water was like in California and how badly the valleys would just flood from snowmelt, essentially, or storms.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you saw, you know, the Oroville, you know, on the spillway, when that kind of failed, that the water coming in there, you know, even going back to, like, I remember, you know, I was on the Oroville City Council for a while, and having a major river going through your town and a levee, you know, that levee is a levee on top of a levee, because Oroville would flood so bad, you know, 100 years ago, they decided we got to build on top, you know, build a whole other layer up there to protect, because at times the water going through the Feather River Canyon can equal what's going through the Mississippi River, you know, in St. Louis. It's a tremendous amount of water that, you know, either we use it or we lose it. So that's why we know that, you know, we need to plan for the future. Yes,
definitely. So water, of course, is a big part of farming. Other aspects of agriculture that I find to be just so fascinating in the era that we're at right now is, I guess, the concept of like regenerative agriculture with the soil. Like you hear about our soil health just being depleted in some areas. What do you think, like, in terms of Butte County right now? I mean, where do you think things stand?
Yeah, well, right now, Chico State is kind of leading, you know, is a leading edge in terms of university and the Regenerative School of Regenerative Agriculture. And we're in the beginning phases, and, you know, going back to the water witchers, but a lot of it is a lot of knowledge that maybe we've left that was kind of common sense. And for almost all farmers, really, all farmers, we rely on the science that we're given, and through the universities a lot, and that's why we have a great, you know, when you look at our state university agricultural schools, that really is the applied theories of agriculture applied on the ground in a local area, and that's why Chico State is here to help local farmers. But with regenerative agriculture, you know, I think they're discovering some great methods of farming that can be used. But this is the thing in agriculture, and what we've kind of get away from in California with just the amount of regulations and requirements we face, is that, you know, when it comes to regenerative agriculture and how we farm, it needs to be more of a menu instead of a checklist. We can't, you know, we can't have, you know, someone saying, here, check this list and do all of this, because it doesn't work. There isn't one size that fits all in agriculture. But you can certainly have a menu where you're like, on my operation, this makes sense, so I'll order one of those. Yeah, this one maybe I'll wait on. So, you know, let's give us a menu. But I think we're making progress. And we have always been, California agriculture has always led the way in terms of environmentally sensitive farming and being pro, you know, forward thinking in agriculture in California.
Yeah, you know, maybe you could do for your, okay, just hear me out here. Maybe you could do the cover crops, right, with the olives, and then you could this is how you get your cattle, right? And then you let the cattle graze on the cover crops and then fertilize the soil because they live there. Your soil health would be crazy, and then you'd have cows.
So now you do, and that's the theory, and that's the way it really has worked in the past for a lot of years. But now you start running into a lot of food safety issues when it comes to having the cattle in there and doing that. So it is a balancing act, where that's where a lot of times the farmers are caught in the middle, because you want a more biodiverse farm, but that biodiversity, can get to a point that it starts, maybe as a risk for the consumer. And the biggest, you see that down in Salinas Valley, and the Leafy Green Initiative, which is a voluntary agreement lettuce farmers put into place to keep the consumer safe. And, they don't want a deer running through, the lettuce fields. In fact, if that happens, they will just plow up that section and it's gone. Or birds even hanging out on overhead. So those are a lot of issues where, that seems like common sense, but then there's a whole other bureaucracy or something behind it that just is saying, no, let's not go there. But it's a matter of getting the right hand and the left hand to talk together when it comes to working with the government.
There are so many things that it seems like, okay, we shouldn't be spraying terrible chemicals, right? Pesticides on our food. And then, like my niece who was studying agriculture at Chico State, when I probably was venting about Monsanto or something like that, and she's like, well, have you ever tried to grow something without any kind of pesticide? And then also I've spoken with other farmers who I've asked them, like, what do you think about these organic not fertilizers, I'm sorry, or more organic solutions? And they say, just because it says organic doesn't mean it's safe. It's maybe just hasn't been as well studied. Like there are certain, concerns about some of those chemicals too.
I mean, all farmers use science to produce a crop, and at the core of agriculture is you are minimizing biodiversity. I mean, that's just what agriculture is. And so we need those tools, and a lot of times it can be. It is a pesticide that is needed to overcome a hurdle that allows us to grow, a crop in the year. But no farmer enjoys going out spending the money on those kind of inputs. But
what are your thoughts though about I guess when I talk about Roundup, that would be an herbicide, right? Not a pesticide.
Right. I mean, they're all kind of now categorized a pesticide.
Okay. I mean, for you, just as a consumer of vegetables and of produce, or of the animals that eat the produce, I mean, what are your thoughts on those chemicals? Are you concerned about cancer?
No, because I know that in terms of the studies and the use of those, if that label is followed, they're safe, and they're deemed to be safe. And I know there will be people that disagree on that in terms of the levels and where we're at, but I do think they're safe, and I think in the long run, when it comes to the availability of fresh produce and what our kids eat today compared to, I grew up in the 80s, and as a young child in the 70s, strawberries were very seasonal. It wasn't year round, whereas now, if my kids go to the refrigerator and there's not a basket of strawberries in there, they're like, we're starving. What's happening here? And that is because of the science we use in agriculture and the ability to grow a diverse crop just based on the science that we put in. So I don't think inherently they're bad, but there is certainly a market, and a significant market, and that'd be the organic market, who wants pesticide free. And so we certainly should make a space that allows that to happen. But you're seeing in agriculture a lot of the practices maybe that were conventional farmers weren't looking at from the 90s or 2000s. They're starting to implement on their farm. So again, once the best science is available, you'll see farmers make the switch when it makes sense for providing to the consumers. So, I like to say we sometimes make farming more complicated than it needs to be, but really we farm for two reasons. One reason is the market. The market determines what we grow, and then we use science to meet that market need. So, and then that market will determine, what science they appreciate and which ones they don't want. But that's the beauty of California agriculture, is that we've created this complex system that allows for a lot of choices. Yeah, we do. And it's funny you mentioned that now, like when I go grocery shopping, I have my I eat a lot of produce, I'm vegetarian. And I just really like vegetables in general. If there wasn't cauliflower or zucchini on the shelf, it's funny because right now I don't have to buy zucchini because I'm growing it, but that's 2 to 3 months a year. And then the other 9 months, I'm expecting my local grocery store to always have my favorite thing. And it's because of exactly what you said. We use science and trade Certainly,
course, but
certainly trade. I always say, olives grow here because we're in a Mediterranean climate, right?
Yeah.
Which is the latitude that we're on. So same as kind of Italy and Tuscany and
Right.
that. And that's the way we've traditionally always farmed, just based on latitude. And now, because of science and the ability to transport food efficiently, we farm longitudinally, which is year round, right? So we get our produce from, hopefully from California when it's in season, and then, from the South America when it's out of season up here. But that also complicates stuff when it comes to the trade issues and all of that. So, but we do benefit as consumers in America, really, with the diversity that we have. And of course, we produce, fruits and vegetables year round in California because of the Imperial Valley, and then watching them move up into the Fresno area and then over to Monterey, just back and forth. We're fortunate. I mean, it truly is a golden state when it comes to agriculture, not necessarily to when it comes to farming in this state, but there's a lot of opportunity in agriculture in California.
what do you think of the genetic modification of different plants that are out there that we eat?
Yeah, I mean, all plants have been modified in some way,
Yeah.
genetically modified. It's a matter of how fast we've done it. So I did work on campaigns to allow GMOs to be grown in Butte County, and felt that science was essential for California farmers to meet demand in the future. And now, believe it or not, we've gone to a new technology which hasn't had quite the controversy as like genetic modification, but certainly is genetically modifying something. That's the CRISPR technology. But I think science that for the most part that we've used in agriculture has gone for the good of the consumer.
Yeah.
And again, there's always secondary markets, and you see that in the GMO-free of people who want that type of vegetable.
But like you said, okay, so we have this idea about like GMO, and you think about when you go to, I don't know, Walmart's produce section, and it's like the grapes are so big, and you think like, oh, scary, like unrealistic. But when you look back, I mean, things like broccoli, I mean, that's created, right? That's a GMO in itself. Wasn't that something that never naturally grew in the wild that we created?
Tomatoes are a nightshade, right? Which is deadly poisonous.
Yeah.
But it's been, everything over time has been modified. We just now have the technology to do it quicker.
Yeah.
And it's similar at the time. And it was, I think at the time for consumers, it was misunderstood because the benefits really were farmers in the original when we were having these, intense GMO debates. And it was, whether they made something pesticide resistant or, some other kind of didn't require as much fertilization. That's all a benefit to the farmer.
Right.
But now as we moved into it where you see health benefits being added to canola oil, same health benefits that are in olive oil, which, technically is a competition for olive oil. You saw attitudes start to change as these changes benefited the consumer, and they could see it, that how it would benefit them. And that's part of marketing, and that's part of agriculture's job too, is to educate consumers and be honest with them.
Right. Okay. Well, during your time on the Farm Bureau, what do you see as maybe your greatest accomplishment that you're most proud of?
I think as we went through the droughts, and traditionally what happens is you would see either commodity turn against commodity, and I'm going back to like the drought in 2015, 2016. We had a little one, kind of a no droughts little. It's a big deal for that year, but kind of in 2022, 21, kind of went through those drought years. But agriculture coming together, and then also working with our urban communities who saw that their water supply was in peril, and really coming up and working together to start trying to educate Sacramento on the importance of water and keeping everyone together, because all too often your opponents who don't want any dams, who don't want to see our cities grow and they don't want to see our farms flourish, really try to divide people. So I think the biggest thing was keeping people together. Also, too, is getting California's voice heard in Washington, D.C., and I think we did we've done a great job of that, and people look to California now in terms of how we deal with these environmental issues.
Okay. And since 2023, you've stepped away from that role, right? And just focused on your own family farm and your business here. Yeah. What have been some of the unique challenges in recent years?
Well, it's regulations. I mean, it simply is just the regulatory environment in California is simply out of control and not sustainable. And people who say they're worried about losing the small family farm, it is about the regulations that are forcing out the small family farm. California Farm Bureau, there was a study done out of Cal Poly, I believe, that did a study on what it takes to farm an acre of lettuce. Regulatory costs, not your fertilizers, not your water costs, not your labor costs, just what are the regulatory costs that go into growing an acre of lettuce in the Salinas Valley. And they had done, and that study came out, I believe, in like 2017, and over that 10-year span, the regulatory costs had gone up, I believe, 900%, just for that 1 acre. That's just regulatory costs. And farmers, we don't always get to determine the price, right? I mean, obviously, unless we're at a farmer's market, but we're price takers, not makers. And so they have updated that to now that same acre of land, the regulatory costs are now 1,400%. Have gone up in the last 10, 15 years.
Just like for the layman like me, when you say regulatory costs, like give me an example of that.
Well, your groundwater, certainly Sigma groundwater management, your fees on that for that. Irrigated lands, a water quality issue. Irrigated lands, you pay a fee, per acre fee for that. There are taxes, there are fertilizer mill taxes or pesticide mill taxes. So I remember people come into the tasting room and you look at the farm and they're from the city and they're like, wow, what a beautiful place, live on a farm, you're living the dream and all of this. And then telling them, the 19 different permits and fees that you have to pay to get that bottle of olive oil to a consumer table is, it's difficult.
Yeah.
And you farm so that you are, outside working the land, driving a tractor, and more you're behind the desk filling out forms.
Okay, so you have to address this rumor for me. I guess rumor is the right way to put it. So ever since I was young, I've heard, farmers, they make so much money and the government gives them subsidies and the government pays them not to grow things some years. Yeah. Like, what's behind that sort of idea?
Not so much anymore. I mean, that's the importance of how the Farm Bill has developed, which most people don't know, but it's a 5-year agreement, really, ultimately of farmers and working with the U.S. government. Back in the days, there were those market manipulations in terms of paying farmers not to grow, but for the most part now, that simply doesn't happen. All farmers, have to farm something.
If they want to sell something.
If they want to sell something. So those are kind of myths that have really disappeared over the last 10 to 20 years and have disappeared simply because agriculture stepped up and said, a lot of this is kind of unfair. Not only because the consumer thought it was, but also with the way they deal with each other, who can work the system the best. And I think that's changed quite a bit in agriculture.
Okay, interesting. So at this point, like if you have a bad year, you rely on your crop insurance.
Right, and that was the big addition, was the crop insurance, and that is subsidized, to be honest, by the government. It's a safety net system, but the farmer still has to pay into it and make those decisions of what's best for his farm, either insurance based on production or insurance based on price, where the market's going to be at. So I don't want to get too far in the weeds because I know most people don't think about that, but crop insurance is a big issue and was a big addition for agriculture. And certainly for California, with our different specialty crops, it's highly complex because every crop is different. You can't just have the same risk management for rice that you would for prunes or for almonds or for olives.
Right.
They all have to be spelled out specifically.
So you obviously have a ton of knowledge and real life experience in the world of agriculture and farming. And you've recently announced that as James Gallagher has termed out, you're going to step in and enter the race for Assembly District 3. Can you tell me about, first of all, actually just what piqued your interest in this role?
Well, I mean, I've worked with James for, I spent 8 years as a first or second vice president in California Farm Bureau down in Sacramento, and then as president for 6 years. And so I have worked with James, and I do know kind of what it entails, and so what it requires. And so I jumped in just based on the fact that I think the person coming after James needs to have that experience to hit the ground running. There's too much on the line right now when we talk about where we're at with, with insurance, homeowners insurance. When we talk, like we've been talking about the water issues, when we talk about our utility rates going up, 120% in the last 10 years, you have to know where you came from if you want to fix it. And so bringing that experience, knowing I can bring that experience is why I have gotten into the race. And also, the breadth of my experience, it's not just agriculture, though that is a driving economic factor in the 3rd District, which is Yuba, Sutter, Glenn, Tehama, and Butte County, and a small part of Placer is the driving factor. But I also served as the Vice Mayor of the city of Oroville, so I know what our cities are facing in terms of economic development and needing to grow and grow properly. To provide those services that agriculture relies on. You don't farm on your own. We come to town to get a lot of services, so we do need healthy cities. And so serving as the Vice Mayor of the city of Oroville, and then my involvement in agriculture, that depth, breadth, and knowledge of what the 3rd District is.
Okay. So if you were to become our representative in the assembly for that district, what would be your key priorities?
A key priority is to build urgency and to come up with fixes. I mean, there is no urgency. It seems like we're just in this managed decline of just unstoppable rising of utility rates. In fact, the Public Utility Commissioner says as we get to net zero energy emissions, zero emission energy, it becomes less advantageous for the consumer, meaning for the foreseeable future, unless we step in and energy prices are going to keep going up. We're seeing that with fuel prices, and we'll see the oil prices go up until we have this urgency that we need to utilize those resources, and whether that's oil or maintaining our gas refineries, oil refineries for gas. There's going to be rising costs, as well as back to water.
Right.
We need to build these storage systems. We need to, as we can also, we didn't talk too much about it, but recharge groundwater is to do away with those permits and the regulations that it takes to bring in excess water into the farm fields to flood and to refill those aquifers.
Right.
And now that, it's not considered a priority use for water by the State Water Board, though we have been successful in slowly changing that outlook.
Does rice farming kind of work as a recharge? I've always been curious about that. When they flood the fields, does some of it go down back into the ground?
I mean, the rice fields are meant to hold water, so the soil isn't
Gotcha.
always, it's more of a gravelly type of soil. But, rice ground can be important for holding water, certainly in high flood years, and then releasing it. That maybe it could be used further downstream at the appropriate time. But rice is an integral part in terms of how we manage water, can be, and how we manage water in California.
So what do you think about, we talk about working across the aisle, right?
Right.
I think it's something that people always want to hear, like, there should be compromise, but at the same time, how much? And then is that the reason why we never can get anything done, because we're working so hard at compromise? Like, what are your ideas about that?
Well, I mean, compromise, right now in the political sphere, compromise is not viewed as a quality. I think it's a matter of, can you get something done while still maintaining your principles? And the principles really running on is, is there someone who's accountable for the action being taken that you want to get done? Does it bring predictability? And that's the biggest thing in California. California is unpredictable in terms of, are we going to get insurance next year? Are we going to be able to afford our energy rates?
Right.
It's just totally unpredictable. And then ultimately, does it bring that freedom that we all enjoy and that liberty? So, the reality is this is a Republican district. I'm running as a Republican. Right now, there are only 19 Republicans in the Assembly. For anything to get done in the Assembly, you will have to try to find those people who have the same values on that issue, and they do exist. But you have to have that relationship with them. They have to know to trust you. You have to trust them, and that's where the experience comes back in, because human nature is you're kind of skeptical until proven otherwise. And so if you have someone and a seasoned assembly member, they know who they can work with across the aisle, and the people across the aisle know who they can work with. So you have to develop those relationships to get it done. But for any Republican to get anything done, it takes a majority of Democrats to be on your side to even get it through the Assembly. So it certainly is it's a tough dance
Okay.
to be a Republican, but it can be done, and I think that's why ultimately getting in this race is that I know in the past we've been able to get that done.
So we talked about the things that you would advocate for. Is there anything that you would be, pretty adamant about opposing and fight against?
Just simply more regulations.
Yeah.
And opposing really is unaccountability. And now it seems like even the legislatures will tell you, well, this board is in charge of that. I don't really have anything to do with that. Meanwhile, the voters are sitting there going, we're getting crushed. Who do we appeal to?
Right.
For help? Who's being held accountable? Because they're just passing, the buck down in Sacramento. So it is, how do we bring more accountability back into the system? And is there a role for the legislature, which is directly elected, by California communities and the voters, to have a say in these fees that just don't stop.
Would it be possible to have the CPUC be elected rather than appointed?
Well, again, it can be accountability. What about if they make a judgment and then the legislature, gets the final up or down? So that therefore, when they pass a fee, a fee increase,
Right.
Someone has to say up or down who is elected directly by the general public, right?
They could do a recommendation,
Right,
but not make
right.
some decision that affects all of
Right.
us. And we're like, who are you people? We didn't elect you.
Yeah, the pendulum has swung so far that I think we're going to have to try to think of some creative ways to bring it back to center at least. But it's simply, even the governor has expressed frustration with his own boards that he appoints. When you look at the Diablo nuclear power plant down there, they're keeping it open.
Yeah.
He received severe pushback, from the Coastal Commission and those people, and as well as the desalination plant. He's voiced frustration. So he appoints a lot of them.
Yeah. What do you think about that power plant and using nuclear power here?
Absolutely.
Even with the fault lines, I'm always afraid of an earthquake.
Well, that's we have seismic engineering.
Right.
I think the science has come a long way on that. You look at countries like France, for example, which is it's a pretty green country in itself in terms of its environmental views on things. And what is it, 70%, 75% of their power comes from nuclear energy.
Right.
I think you're going to see maybe, and some cities are looking at it like, I don't know what the correct term would be, but community power plants in which the communities can have their own power generating system. And for going back to an economic development, power, the ability to have power is huge to bring companies in.
Right.
So I think we need to be looking at how do communities take control of their own power supply, whether that is whether that's nuclear power or it can be it can be cogeneration. Certainly with the wood products that we have around here,
and that kind of
around
stuff.
here.
I haven't heard of any pitches in California, and I don't know why, for using volcanic steam power.
Oh, geothermal?
Geothermal. We could, right? Lassen, Shasta. You never know.
As the technology it gets easier to use, and it's usually just a scale of economy, right?
Yeah.
And how much does it cost to build it? But as we see over time, costs come down.
Yeah.
And the technology gets bigger and easier to use.
Okay, so we have, the election is a while from now. Right. What is on your agenda from now until then?
It really has been a grassroots campaign in terms of going out to different groups and introducing, yourself and getting to know them, and then also learning about the communities. And that's the biggest thing is, one size doesn't fit all. So what's, Chico's issues aren't necessarily always Red Bluff's issues. Certainly they can cross over and share similar concerns, but it is getting to know the 3rd District and understanding what the issues are and how you can best serve them. Just, making yourself available for any group who wants to meet and talk about their concerns and what makes me different in terms of one of the 3 candidates in this race.
Well, let's just do a lightning round random questions so people in 2 to 3 minutes can just get to know you a little bit more so than just the politician, right? Because politicians are, they smooth talkers, but no one really knows them.
Right.
Favorite TV show?
Favorite TV show? I'm not a big TV watcher,
Really?
but it's watching Giants baseball.
Okay, all right, Giants fan. Is that your only sport that you love, or are you big sports in general?
Football. You go there, but I think where I'm at in life, baseball is easier watched as you interact with the kids, and you don't have to
Yeah.
fully be glued to it. So
Tell me about your family and your kids. How many?
so I have 3 children. The oldest is going to be a senior at Durham High.
Oh.
And then my next child, Luke, Jack is the oldest, and then Luke is going to be a sophomore at Durham High, and then Kate, our girl, is going to be in 8th grade.
Do you think that any of the 3 of them are going to become farmers also?
They certainly are expressing interest in it as they get older and participate in FFA and showing animals at the fair and participating in the Durham Grange as my daughter Kate does. So they show interest in it. Certainly not pushing on them. As you become older, right? And I feel, man, you catch yourself saying, I don't know. I'm glad I started when I did. I don't know if I would start. It's all different now, but every generation, feels that.
Right.
So they do show an interest in getting into agriculture.
So if you were to take a trip, right? If you had a whole week off, money's no object, and where would you go and who would you go with?
It would certainly be the family, and I have been there before, but I love Yellowstone.
Oh,
I just love that area. I love the wildlife.
Yeah.
It's just it's a spectacular part of God's creation. So I always choose Yellowstone. My kids are like, again, Dad, or I'm sure that's what they would say, but.
Oh, I've got to ask, what do you think of the Yellowstone wolf repopulation project back from the 90s and the impact on California today?
No, and that's something we worked on in terms of just at least trying to get, support for our cattle ranchers. It isn't going to get easier up there. It was, I believe it was a mistake reintroducing the wolf. And these aren't, these are Canadian wolves, so they're not genetically the same that were here.
Mm-hmm.
I'd heard that. It's disappointing, and it's getting rougher and rougher for our cattle ranchers. And we've had them come through Butte County, and we've had, we're going to deal with it all over California. And you're seeing, even now in Montana and Idaho, they're having to deal with it. And that's one of the things, the effect on not only for ranchers, but wildlife in general.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of going to Yellowstone, they've had a tremendous impact on the wildlife in Yellowstone. So, it's something that has to be fixed.
Yeah, okay. Any last thing that you would like somebody to know about you, aside from, Jamie, the politician, but the human?
Yeah, just someone who was always, loved and believed in their community, whether it was, serving on a chamber of commerce in Oroville or, involvement in local Farm Bureau issues, and someone who appreciates how unique the North State is. I grew up in Humboldt County in the heart of redwoods. In college, I would work at the Pacific Lumber Company, and I watched an activist movement decimate that industry, and watched my friends, lose jobs that their great grandparents had because no one stood up and could really push back. And let's not lose that in the North State, especially when it comes to agriculture. And let's appreciate that we live in a unique part of California and the United States. And as someone who has gotten to travel to almost every county in California, talking with farmers, realized, wow, I actually farm in a very special place. Sometimes it's easy to take that for granted, but the biggest thing, and you have people in other parts of California saying, we know we need to work together. How do you guys are able to do that up in the North State? And the first is that we like each other and we pull for each other.
Yeah.
And so we need someone who can get that done also down in Sacramento for the local communities and the local farmers.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great having you on here.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for listening today. I decided to offer this podcast after enough of you let me know that you wanted a deeper dive into certain stories than you get on our TV broadcasts. We elect certain people to represent our voice, but who are they really? My hope is that this podcast answers that question. I love your feedback, and I want to know who you'd like to hear from next. Just fill out that comment section and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify.